Hey folks, this is Alexander Wynn.
And I am Lacey Hannon.
And you are here watching The Synthesis, the show where we discuss real science being used in entertainment. This week we are talking about the movie October Sky, based on the book Rocket Boys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good time.
Yeah, I love this movie. This is one from my teenage years that was sort of helped chart the course of who I wanted to be as a person. Yeah, October Sky was big for Alexander.
Nerd.
Yep, a little bit. A little bit. It's the story of a group of high school kids in West Virginia, in a West Virginia mining town, who start making homemade rockets and end up going higher than any of them ever thought they could. And it's awesome.
I just want to see how long I can make him talk. That's what's happening over here. So
that's a dangerous game because I'm just going to take over the whole show.
He can talk forever. That's true.
So a couple of things that were interesting that I found sort of behind the scenes before we actually start talking about the movie. Let's talk about talking about the movie. So first off, it's based on the book Rocket Boys, but it's not called Rocket Boys because the marketing team at the film studio, when they were making the movie, did some focus testing and found out that women over 30 would never go see a movie called Rocket Boys. So they renamed it October Sky based on the October skies as Sputnik flew over. But interestingly, October Sky is an anagram of Rocket Boys. And I was not able to find anywhere anybody saying if that's a coincidence or did somebody all right, we can't do Rocket Boys, I guess I'll make an anagram. Was that the thought? I don't know. But anyway, October Sky, anagram of Rocket Boys.
That's interesting and a little weird.
Right?
It'd be weird for it to be a coincidence, but I can somehow still see it being a coincidence.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I looked up to see, how much money it made and all that kind of stuff. I found out that it made $34.7 million, and I was like, oh no, was October Sky a flop? No, welcome to the 90s. The whole movie only cost $25 million, so it was quite successful. I'm just so used to Marvel movie budgets.
Well, and what we know right now is that producers have told me this frequently, that we don't have mid-sized movies anymore.
Right.
And the audiences can see that. We have all of these indie movies that are made for under $5 million. Mm-hmm. If they're under 3, it's even better. And then big tentpole movies, right? And that's your Marvel stuff or anything that's your blockbuster. And that's what keeps all of the other movies funded. Mm-hmm. But they don't do the mid-sized movies, or not very often.
Right.
And
which is unfortunate.
Even when the stories could be a mid-size budget, they often get inflated.
Yeah.
Yep.
So a couple of interesting things, as always, when you've got a story that is being twice adapted from real life to book and then from book to movie, obviously things are going to change. Mm-hmm. There are a bunch of things like that we don't need to go into. Apparently there were 6 Rocket Boys instead of 4. Homer Hickam was a junior. His father's name was also Homer, so in the movie they changed it to John so people wouldn't get confused. Right. Things like that. But a couple of interesting things that I found in terms of the legacy of this movie. I didn't realize that this movie had a legacy. I thought it was just a good movie from the 90s that if you've seen it, you probably enjoyed it. But a couple of interesting things came out of this movie. First off, there are not 1, but 2 festivals honoring the Rocket Boys.
What?
Yeah, annual festivals that are held every year. One of them is in West Virginia, and it actually honors the Rocket Boys. It's a thing that they do every year. And then the other is in Tennessee. There is an annual gathering about the movie. They filmed it in Tennessee instead of in West Virginia, and it's like when you go to New Zealand and you visit all the Lord of the Rings filming locations. There's tours and stuff of October Sky filming locations, which
I love that.
Yeah, it's awesome. I didn't realize that this movie was that big.
We've talked not us with you guys, but Alex and I have talked a lot about the different meccas that crop up. Okay, so people know that the original Star Wars movies, there were parts of them that were filmed in Tunisia, but there's really no place to go.
Yeah.
I've been to Tunisia. It was pointed out to me, hey, that's where that part was filmed. Well, okay, but there's nothing there
Yeah,
to go to.
it's not like a Star Wars site in the same way that, like, when you go to New Zealand, there is Hobbiton. You can visit Hobbiton. It's got a visitor center with a gift shop, and they've got tours.
And that's like not the only thing. Like you can go to Mount Sunday, which is Edoras, but you also have all of the tours that take you there. And when we went on the tour, anyway, the bus driver had been a sound guy on the movie, and he just liked to do the tours.
Yeah. And so he was not only talking about, this is where they filmed such and such. He was like, this is where we filmed this, and he'd like walk you through.
And he talked about like going to the Oscars and stuff like that. Which, I mean, it was so cool, right? And you've got a couple of different places like that in New Zealand. Hobbiton is obviously like the big one, but every so often we look up and we're like, where are the rest of them? Because they're so much fun.
Yeah.
And of course you've got, backlots that you can see tours of.
Yeah. And there are like locations, again, like Tunisia, where there's sort of no pomp and circumstance. You can go visit the Ghostbusters building in New York. You can go visit the Friends apartment building in New York, things like that. And you can just sort of point at it and be like, oh, look, that's where they shot the thing. But there's nothing there.
Yeah.
And it's so surprising. It seems like if somebody, I don't actually know what the Ghostbusters building in New York is right now. It was supposedly a fire station. I don't know if it's actually a fire station, but whatever it is, I feel like somebody could buy that buy that building and make bank.
You would have to get some sort of rights, but I don't know why someone hasn't. Maybe they've tried, but I don't know why there isn't a Central Perk. Like, that just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And
there actually is in Turkey. Somebody started a Central Perk chain of cafes in Turkey.
Well, that's one way to do it.
Yeah.
But so what I'm saying is it's really cool that there is one for this movie, of all things.
Yeah, and super cool.
That it's a science movie and it's based on a true story. I love that fact.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
So the other thing that really jumped out at me, it's just crazy how history unfolds. It's, they're just weird little wrinkles in how things happen. October Sky came out, I believe, in 1999, and in the audience, there was a guy who saw the movie and was super moved by it and was really sort of powerfully motivated by the message of this film, and that person was Jeff Bezos. And apparently, when he left the theater and went to go talk about it after the screening, he was talking to sci-fi author Neil Stephenson, and he mentioned that he had always wanted to start a space company. And Neil Stephenson was like, "Well, why don't you?" And now Jeff Bezos has Blue Origin, which is a SpaceX competitor. So, like, October Sky is the reason that Blue Origin exists, I guess.
That's bizarre.
Right?
Like, it's not bizarre. I shouldn't say that. It's just Jeff Bezos being inspired by. I don't know. I guess I shouldn't say that either, because he's the one who quote unquote saved the Expanse.
Yep, that guy is a sci-fi nerd.
He is. Well, I'm glad he brings us a couple of good things. One of the other things that I will say, just that we think we're right on, is Laura Dern is the one who plays Miss Riley.
Yep.
And what's
wonderful actress.
Yes,
Jurassic Park and Star Wars and a whole bunch of great stuff.
She was the one who played Ellen DeGeneres' girlfriend on the episode where Ellen DeGeneres came out on TV. And because of that episode, Laura Dern was blacklisted from Hollywood for quite some time and had to get security guards to go with her. She was being threatened a lot. And this was her first movie that she got after all of that. And it took her, she lost a lot of roles because of that.
It took her a couple of years to get back into Hollywood after this. And so strange, but man, what a comeback role. Like, this is such a great role for her. And she's always said that
she's never regretted doing the role in that episode of Ellen, and she's very proud of it, which I think is wonderful and lovely. It's amazing how much in some ways how much Hollywood has changed, because that today would not be the reason Hollywood would Hollywood will still blacklist you for things. Yeah. This is just not one of those reasons. So.
Well, and it's especially crazy because she's not gay. Like, she played a gay character on a TV show, and people from Hollywood who ought to know how actors playing characters works blacklisted her. It's very strange.
Yeah.
Yeah, very strange.
So.
But what a great comeback role, October Sky.
Yeah.
So
all right. Shall we get into it?
Jump into it.
Do you want to do a synopsis up front?
I think we handled it up top. Group of kids in a coal mining town in West Virginia start developing homemade rockets and eventually use it as a vehicle to get out, to go to college, get out of the really crushing cycle of being locked into this company town.
For a man who likes to use 10 words when he could use one, he actually just did the thing where he just used one. That was like one long sentence.
Look at me, I'm growing.
Oh my God, it's happening. Okay, let's just kind of start with the scholarship conversation. Mm-hmm. They talk about how jocks are the only ones who get out of the town. Yep. They're the only ones who get girlfriends, and they're the only ones who get scholarships.
Yep.
And I will say that being from a very small Midwestern town, mm-hmm. that was an experience. Now, it wasn't quite this bad. Yeah. It's not like the 60s and a coal town, but there was a lot of people trying to get, make sure that they have the best grades, or mm-hmm. All of these big accomplishments that people could do with music and whatnot, and scholarships were just hard to come by. Or you'd get like $1,000, mm-hmm. and it's like, how far is that really going to get you? But the jocks would go on to get full rides, and so hearing that, it just kind of broke my heart. It resonated because that was absolutely a thing that people struggled with.
It broke my heart too because it didn't resonate. I grew up in a big city, and it was a reasonably well-off neighborhood, and I actually have written in my notes, I am so glad that I didn't grow up in a town where the whole local culture was oriented toward escaping. Like that, I grew up in sort of the opposite. I grew up in the town that you didn't want to leave. People referred to it as the bubble because everybody just sort of stayed in and did their thing in this neighborhood, and the idea that I wanted to move to LA was strange.
See, whereas I came from a town where pretty much everyone wanted to leave except the college or university that most people ended up at was I'm from Yankton, South Dakota, so I went to Yankton High. There's only one high school. And we called it Yankton High Take 2 because it was 23 minutes if you were speeding 5 minutes or 5 miles per hour over the speed limit. That's how long it took you to get to the university. Yeah. And anyway, there were a lot of people trying to escape who that next town over was as far as they got. I actually didn't want to escape. Mm-hmm. I just always knew that my career wouldn't allow me to stay as much as I love South Dakota so much, but you can't do acting work there. So gotta go. So that one, it broke my heart, but
yeah. Well, anyway. This movie does an incredible job of justifying why this scholarship is so important. Like the slow grind of lifestyle in Coalwood, and just the sort of there's a quote that is, quite famous, but that I thought of a lot during this movie, which is, it's from Henry David Thoreau, which is, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." And that is exactly what this movie is. This movie is quiet desperation. Yeah. And, ooh, man.
Even like the happiest miner, which is Jake, we see him pretty early on. Yeah. And then we see him a couple times throughout. He's the one who, when Homer ends up working in the mines, Jake is his manager. Jake is also the one that's at the strike. Mm-hmm. or at the union meeting, and then is a part of the strike. He even was like, he was the happiest of
he's
all
a pretty
of the
jovial guy.
Yeah, and even then it just still felt like run ragged, I guess. I think if we're not being from coal country, I felt like they did a great job of really delving into the culture and the lives and the pride that goes into this world. It wasn't beautiful, but it was nice. It was really nice to get that glimpse, to be that fly on the wall for it. So
for sure. Speaking of the setting, by the way, the very first thing that jumped out at me about this movie is something that I really enjoy, which is that it portrayed something that was very real, but that doesn't really get committed to film very often, which is that America was getting its ass kicked in the space race.
Yeah.
Like, Americans love to sort of win the point just before the buzzer, declare victory, and then retroactively be like, we won that game, and not mention the fact that you were losing most of the time. But that is exactly what happened with the space race. If you go through the history of the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union had the first object in space, the first animal in space, the first man in space, the first woman in space, the first space station, the first probe on Venus, the first probe on Mars. It just goes on and on and on and on and on. And then Americans had landing on the moon. And we were like, done, victory, finished, moving on. And so these days, a lot of people look back on the space race as Americans won it. But this story is set at a point where there's sort of a big question mark about whether we are ever going to catch up to the Soviets in space. And there's a lot of incidental dialogue where people are talking about Sputnik, and they're talking about how there are cameras up on that thing, or there are probably bombs up on that thing. Spoiler alert, Sputnik was a hunk of metal that beeped. Sputnik did nothing. It was an achievement that we got a beeping piece of metal up into space. It did not have cameras. It did not have missiles. It had nothing.
Some of that dialogue reminded me of, so one of the lines was, they're not going to, why would they bomb us here?
Cold.
Like,
That'd be a waste of a bomb.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember after 9/11, there were, all of these conspiracies. I mean, theories of
just like assumptions, really.
Of where bombs would be dropped. And I remember my town is right on a dam on one of the biggest rivers in the US, and people were like, it could happen here. And I was like, nobody's gonna get that far into American airspace, and no one wants to put in that time and effort, guys.
Yeah.
That's why they...
the targets of Al-Qaeda are going to be the biggest symbol of the American military, the biggest symbol of the American government, the biggest symbol of the American economy, and the dam in Yankton, South Dakota.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, so after 9/11, they took Bush to Omaha, Nebraska, which is like 2.5 hours south of Yankton, and they told everybody where he was. Because, I'm sorry, nobody's going to get to middle America. That's just not how it works. And so they don't care. Yeah. And so that's what that made me think of. It was just like, they did a great job with small town America.
Yes, 100%.
And I loved that. The thing that I really liked about seeing Sputnik for the first time is this isn't something that would happen for us today, but looking up there and seeing Sputnik would probably be scary for a multitude of reasons, but that's probably the fastest they've ever seen anything go through space.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Can you imagine looking at, we see it all the time. We see airplanes all the time. We see different, we see the space station and satellites. This isn't going to be something that occurs to us, but for the first time ever, seeing there's an artificial satellite up there.
There's a new star in the sky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it doesn't blink, it just moves really fast. Oh my gosh. I think that would be legitimately frightening.
Well, and just awe-inspiring. Depending on how you look at it, I totally buy Homer Hickham's response, which is just awe. He's looking up and there's a new light in the sky. How amazing is that?
But is that not, to me that's like that's the childlike wonder of it.
Yeah.
If you're an adult living in the time and you're really frightened by the Russians, that would be scary. You've lived
Yeah,
a
no,
good
it just
chunk of your life.
Yeah, it comes down to what is more important to you: the fear of what that thing might do, or the awe of the fact that it happened at all.
Yeah.
You know, like you can be terrified of the Nazis and still be like, wow, they made really good planes. You know, like
Well, no, and I get that. I'm just saying, like, if you're someone in your 40s or 50s, you've lived, you know, a good portion of that century, and you've never seen anything like this. You've lived a good portion of your adulthood and never seen anything like this. And all of the context around it of the Russians versus the US, and oh my God, I just think that there's, and then of course, then there are these kids who are like, this is dope.
Yep.
This is dope. I want to do that.
Yeah.
And which is, I think it's so cool that it's inspiring to them.
Yeah.
So
it's I have exactly the same thing. Just that moment is so great. There was an interesting little callback to something we've discussed earlier on the synthesis here, which is pretty early. He starts writing letters to Wernher von Braun, and it reminded me of the conversation that we had during the Nat Geo Mars episodes about how these days SpaceX is the big sort of pioneer in space, and the guy we know from SpaceX is a businessman. And nobody knows the scientists at SpaceX. But back then, obviously, it wouldn't be a businessman because NASA isn't a company, it's an agency. But even so, he's not writing letters to the president. He's not even writing letters to, like, the administrative head of NASA. He's writing letters to the scientist, to the guy who is making these rockets, who's doing the math behind these rockets, because that's the hero.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's an important difference between how it went then and how it's going now.
You know, now that I really think about it, I feel like this movie didn't touch on real science so much as it touched on real history. That's where we get so much more of the detail.
Yeah.
And it's just little nuggets that they put in there. You've got von Braun, and then you've got Sputnik, obviously. Like, these are a couple of obvious ones, but we hear about the Red Tails from World War II.
Tuskegee Airmen. Yep.
And you also, you know, you get, I don't remember his last name, Ike, the guy who's the first machinist who helps him, and then ends up in the mines. You know, he's talking about his family back home in Europe and what it's like.
Presumably behind the Iron Curtain now.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, I don't know, they're just these little things that felt, you know, they when they take apart the railroads, and the kid is like, yeah, because mines die out and then they don't need the trains, and so of course we can take these, which is, I did not like that that sequence at all. It was a little terrifying for me, but I think they did a really good job. What I'm saying is that they did a great job of dealing with the history of the time, giving us a lot of context, and giving us a really good reference of where we are and when we are. You can always put, hey, this is Colwood in the I don't know, we're in 1950s. And that doesn't necessarily root you to that until you have characters like, and I don't remember what the man's name is, but the black man who says that he was in the Red Tails in World War II, and you're like, oh man, you're not even very old. Like, I don't know, there's just something really lovely about it. It creates these roots for the story that really place it in an era, in a time, and I loved that. Yeah, historical accuracy for sure. The other thing that this movie does, which I agree, it doesn't do a lot of real science in the sense of the nitty-gritty of how it all works. The closest that we get is a few montages working on rockets, and then the trigonometry sequence where he's actually like walking you through. But even then, he doesn't describe the math too much. He just describes the conclusions of the math. But the other thing that this movie does, which I feel like makes it fit within the synthesis, is it is all about the attitude toward science. It's about how people think about science. And it's even back to what we were just talking about, that a town full of people are looking up at this light in the sky and thinking threat. And one guy is looking up in the sky and thinking achievement. And that is the scientist distinction. You know, he's focusing on the how, not the
the end result. And there's, you were talking earlier about capturing sort of the pride of small towns, because there is definitely this culture in very small towns of like, we don't need those big city folk. And there's a great moment where Homer is talking to his dad, and the dad just dismisses Wernher von Braun. Like, it's a fad, it'll move, they'll move on as soon as they're done. He even says maybe then they'll have to get a real job. And then shortly thereafter, he gives his own justification for why his life is important. He says, the coal we mine makes steel, and if steel fails, this country fails. And I just felt like that is such a great representation of how everybody has pride. Everybody finds a way to justify how their life is sort of the most important effort being made right now. And, you need steel for the 1950s. He's not wrong, but at the same time, like, you're seriously going to say that, like, your job in the coal mine is the only important thing, and that Wernher von Braun just needs to get a real job?
Yeah, it really feels like the way that, at least in America, we look at CEOs and we're like, well, without them, we wouldn't have any jobs.
Yeah.
But then you have the working class without us, you wouldn't have a company.
Yeah, exactly.
And in some ways, both are correct.
Yeah.
So you have to have both, and both are being able to run a company and also being a part of the working class. Both are worthy of praise and
recognition.
And you get to have pride about either one of those.
But that stubborn need to diminish the other's importance is just, it's very real.
And I've heard it. I have heard that exact line about like when I'll get a real job.
Yeah.
I have never forgiven that person. It's like one of the few grudges that I am willing to hold.
Yeah.
Because screw you, man. I'm working 3 jobs.
Well, and that's one of the things that I'm very grateful to my parents that I never did hear. That like my pretty much my whole family is lawyers, and I decided that I wanted to go to film school, and then I didn't end up making movies, but I did make video games, and nowhere along the way did anybody say like, give it a few years, but then you should really think about going to law school. Like, nobody ever gave me that speech, and I'm, now here I am with.
That's awesome,
right? Yeah, very grateful.
Yeah. I have to say real quick on the science front, that montage where they're just shooting off rockets and failing.
Yes.
Oh my God, it's one of the longest montages I've ever seen, because like oftentimes a montage will tell you a story, right?
Yeah.
It's okay, they did this and it's like one step after another.
Yeah.
No. This is not that. This is just failures.
Yeah.
And I like, how sometimes in comedy, like, okay, there's the rule of 3, you do it 3 times, that's the funniest. But then some people are really good and they can take it past that, and you can do something 10 times and it's hysterical every time. Yeah. That's what this was.
Progressively funnier because of how many times it's happening.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's what this was for me. I was like, there was a moment where I was like, oh, this is going on too long. And then you saw the next one and the next one. And it just, I don't know, there was glee in the fact that they didn't get it right the first time and they kept going. And it's kind of funny how dedicated these kids are. Yeah. And obsessive. And I love it. There's just something about it that I was like, oh man, I hope I have kids that do like, they don't have to build rockets, but like fail that many times and keep going. Just try it.
Well, the other thing that scene does that is sort of subtle, because this is a type of montage that exists in a lot of movies, is like the hero trying to do the thing and failing. He hasn't figured it out. There's a montage like that in the first Iron Man movie where he's trying to build the suit and he keeps like throwing himself up against the ceiling and he keeps failing and all that. But because this sequence is so long, I feel like a subtle but important message gets communicated, which is not just, oh, they're new at this, they're figuring it out. It keeps going, and what you walk away with is a sense that, oh, this is hard. Yeah. That this is not easy. This is not something that you just do a few times and figure out. No, you're going to do it again and again and again and again and again, and you're going to keep failing. And by the time we come out the other end of that montage, we're buying into the idea that he really does need to go learn trigonometry and get a totally new kind of steel. And like all the decisions that the Rocket Boys are making in this movie, they now carry the weight of expertise. That they have figured out that this is actually necessary. They're not just playing with toys.
I had a rocket section in a tech class.
Yeah.
And I think that, so I had seen October Sky before this and did not enjoy it. And
why is that?
Because it made me cry.
Yes.
And I don't like to cry in public. Thank you. I'm working on it. Crying is allowed for men and women. We should all be allowed. But I did not have that mentality in high school. And I used my long hair to my advantage to create a curtain because nobody wants to cry in front of their peers. So that's part of why I didn't like this movie. And so I didn't really remember much going into it. But another reason why I think I wasn't stoked about this is because I didn't understand why rockets were so cool. I took the tech class we all had to take, and I took the rocket module that sometimes you just ended up taking because you didn't get your first or second or fifth choice. And the rocket module was so lame and so boring. And this movie made me go, oh, it could have not been. Now, it could not have been this.
No.
Like, that's just not how it could have.
They're not going to let you blow yourself up.
Yeah, exactly. But simultaneously, this movie made me understand why these kids were interested and intrigued and inspired and all of that, all of the eyes.
Yes.
Speaking of blowing themselves up,
Yeah.
I really like at the beginning, the mom says, just don't blow yourself up. And then he turns around and nearly blows himself up. That's when the fence gets blown up. And I was just like, oh, kiddo, please don't hurt yourself.
Didn't I tell you not to blow yourself up?
Yeah. And then they go on to not wear goggles. There's a moment where, like through that entire montage, and I was going, oh my God, can someone put on goggles, please? Like, I am so terrified for your eyes. I'm not telling you to not blow the things up. Yeah. I'm just yourselves and your eyes. Yeah. Just the vulnerable bits.
I will say, I love his mom. Very sweet. She's got, through her mural and her preoccupation with Myrtle Beach, I feel like she is one of these characters that you talk about in writing classes, where she's got her own story that's unfolding, and this movie isn't about her, but she's definitely got a thing about Myrtle Beach and her relationship with her husband and wanting to go off. And so at the end of the movie, when they're doing the sort of where are they now, and it says that she retired to Myrtle Beach, it's not just trivia. It feels like the conclusion of something.
Yes,
you know,
it does.
It feels like the culmination of her arc, and that was great. We need to talk about John. We need to talk about Homer's dad.
Yep, we do.
I had actually filed him in my memory as worse than he was somehow. Chris Cooper, obviously, this is his brand. Like, this is the kind of character that Chris Cooper does, and he does it so well, which kind of sucks, I feel like, for Chris Cooper. Like, I don't know what it would be like to be a guy in the world whose whole job is like, you get hired to be the asshole abusive dad, and that's just, oh, look, it's another script where I'm like punching my son, like that. I feel like that would be a bummer. But that being said, Chris Cooper does an incredible job with these roles. And I feel like this is the ultimate one. This is.
So I think it felt very real. He could, it could have been taken in multiple directions. It could have been far more abusive, or he could have been more of an alcoholic, and they still would have lived in reality. But what I liked about this is he was just an asshole for so much. The first thing we see is, hey, a guy nearly gets himself killed, and everybody is gathered because people are coming up from the mine, and something has obviously happened.
John has saved his life personally.
Yeah, and so they call him a hero, and Homer says, that's my dad. And then John yells at the man who's obviously hurt and nearly died, and it's like, you're fired because I told you not to, like, screw up. You're a screw up. And then Homer's like, that's my dad.
Yeah.
And I love that the first way we get introduced to him is that he does have good qualities, but he's going to follow it up with being an asshole. And that's just, it's just the way it is.
You know, there's a thing that I have become interested in the last few years. I am not an angry person. I actually struggle a lot to express my anger. Like I err on the side of jovial too much. You may notice my wife sitting next to me nodding gently, and behind the camera is our producer also nodding gently. But there are certain characters in fiction that I've become kind of fascinated by because at first I didn't like them. I categorically just wrote them off as assholes. These are characters like John in October Sky, but also like Roy in the TV show Ted Lasso, if you've seen that show. Also,
you should watch
like
that show. It's so good.
You should watch Ted Lasso. But Roy in Ted Lasso, also Varenus in the HBO and BBC series Rome. These are characters who are sort of only angry. They only operate in the world through anger, but they're not bad guys. They're assholes, but they're not bad guys. And it's fascinating to watch them struggle with their anger when they don't want to be angry. You know, like there's a whole arc where Varenus is trying to reconnect with his wife, who he hasn't seen in like 10 years because he was off at war. And he's an angry guy, but she's his wife, and how do I do this, you know? And again, Roy in Ted Lasso dealing with his anger, but also trying to turn it into a constructive force. And there's actually a moment in the show where somebody calls him out and is like, you're not letting yourself get angry, and we need you to. And now with John, the thing that I found interesting about John is a surface reading of October Sky is he's an abusive father. But really, he's not an abusive, like he doesn't beat up Homer.
No, I'd still say he's abusive.
Well, I mean, he is cruel in a lot of ways. He's emotionally abusive in a lot of ways. But what he does is, it's like he only has one emotion, and that's anger. And he will express it at you. When you do something that makes him angry, he will get angry at you. But then we also have scenes of him expressing love, and it's in the language of anger. How does he respond to his son and his friends getting arrested? He bails him out and he lectures him and he gets up in his son's face, and then he immediately turns around and protects one of the other kids from his physically abusive father by getting angry. And he barely says anything kind to the child, but you can tell he's trying to be kind to the child by getting angry at his abuser. And I'm just fascinated by this character who is trying to use anger constructively.
I have lots of feelings about John. I don't have a lot of good feelings about John, to be honest. Like, he's emotionally abusive. He's verbally abusive. Yeah.
And to be clear, I'm not forgiving John. I'm saying he's an interesting character.
And I don't put him on the level of Roy.
No?
No, because Roy has a lot more going for him in terms of good attributes.
Yeah.
Whereas this guy is willing to sit in his anger. And we see the difference between the way he treats his sons. Because I don't remember what the oldest son's name is.
Yeah.
But that son does not get in trouble.
Right.
That son is
clearly the golden child.
And John is proud of him and all of that stuff. Whereas he's got this incredibly, and you know what? A child's athletic ability is totally worth being proud of. But having another son who's incredibly gifted at, I shouldn't even say gifted. He is working so hard to be good at something, and is. I mean, we know from Miss Riley that Homer is not good at math.
Right.
But
this is not the story of a wunderkind.
Yeah.
This is the story of a dedicated person.
Exactly. And I think that why isn't there pride for that?
Yeah.
And I get it. The moment that he pulls that stepdad off of one of the kids and says, he'll beat him
Yeah.
if he sees this happen again, and says to the kid, your dad was one of the best people I knew. I was like, that is good, and it's great that we're seeing that. We're seeing it really far into the movie. This is his save the cat moment.
Yeah.
But it's like at least halfway through the movie.
Yeah.
And I think,
although I would say really his save the cat moment is the scene that you described, because our introduction to this character is not he's yelling at our hero and getting up in his face and all that. Our introduction to this guy is he saves people's lives and then screams at them inappropriately.
I don't know that that's a save the cat moment though, because you're not emotionally invested in it. It doesn't make you emotionally invested in him.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think that the point of a save the cat moment is to be emotionally invested and root for someone, even if it's just a little bit. And
yeah, if it's not literally a save the cat moment, I feel like it is a deliberate way of introducing us to this character,
Yes,
that he is being presented simultaneously as scary and helpful.
And that's exactly that's what I was
Yeah.
saying when I was talking about his introduction.
Yeah.
I appreciate that we get both sides of him, but I don't think that we care about him at that point. And it takes until middle of the movie, and then we kind of go back to, okay, he's not as bad as he could be,
Right.
which is not how I feel about Roy or Varenus,
Yeah.
where
That is very much how I feel about Varenus. That's
Really?
not how I feel about Roy. No, I would put Varenus as sort of worse than John.
I mean, I don't really
Varenus, yeah.
remember Rome as well as you did, but
Yeah.
or you do, but and then at the end, we see this moment where he mocks his son for not recognizing his hero, and I was just like, excuse my language, but I'm going to say this: you shut the fuck up, man.
Yeah.
Like, this kid is in shock that he won, and you couldn't just say something nice about being proud of him. You had to mock him for not recognizing his hero. That it's not like today where you see these people on Instagram and TV and all of this stuff. No, he had a picture that was stolen from him. I was so angry.
Yeah.
And so I don't
See,
have
that
a
to
lot.
me read as vulnerable.
No, it is.
And therefore a little more sympathetic. It's still a dick move, but I didn't hate him for it because I saw that he didn't know how to process feeling like his son hated him.
Sure, and I get that. I think this character really reminds me of a guy I went to college with who was a year younger than me, who grew up on a farm, and his dad never once told him, "I love you" or "I'm proud of you."
Yeah.
And the way that it really messed with this guy's life to feel like he wasn't worthy of his father's affection, and being in theater, you kind of get a little bit more into each other's backstories, personal lives and emotional lives and all of this stuff, and how much in some ways it fucked him up to just not hear it. And so I don't have a lot of forgiveness for someone who treats their kid like this.
And like I said, I don't have forgiveness for him either. If this was a real person that I knew in real life, I'd think he was a fucking asshole and I would not want to associate with him. But as a fictional character, I find it an interesting way to go to take this fundamentally unlikable character and present them as trying, it's an interesting arc for someone to start from a place that is essentially a villain and then show how can they, this is not the story of somebody who doesn't want to connect with his son. This is the story of somebody who apparently really wants to connect with his son and simply doesn't know how. He himself was raised by somebody like this.
I don't see it. I don't agree with it. No, because I don't think he's trying so much as he's got these moral parameters that you do not cross. Yeah. You do not hit kids. You do not get anybody else on any other minors killed. You people shouldn't die in the mines. These are the things that he cares about, and that's it. So long as you don't cross those lines, he's going to be an asshole.
Well, but you have to at least give that he struggles in this movie. That like there are, it's not just Homer who is unhappy with how these conversations go down. There are multiple scenes where the dad is trying to like he'll sort of start to do something conciliatory and then kind of recoil from it, and he's not just sort of brushing it aside, be a man and move on. This is somebody who is looking for a way to connect, and
I can't help you here.
I can see the chain of fathers stretching back, I guess.
I get it. There's a history that really leans heavily on this man, and I get that. But that doesn't mean I'm going to be particularly sympathetic to his traumas. It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
And we know that that's how this sort of abuse works. But it doesn't mean that I can just check that box and be like, that's who you are, man. And good on you for trying. I'm not saying that's what you're doing. Okay. But I cannot just give him any sort of passes, any sort of like extra sympathy or anything. I can't give him anything. Yeah. So that's where I'm with him. Yeah. Not wild about him.
In a similar vein of this movie capturing how people really work, I had to chuckle. There are a lot of movies. Every year there are a lot of movies that depict some version of the awkward teen. But I feel like this movie, speaking as someone who was an awkward teenage boy, this movie did a really good job of capturing what it's like to be a genuinely clueless teenage boy. Like, it's not just that he doesn't know how to talk to the pretty girl, it's that he didn't even realize that the pretty girl was talking to him. There are multiple scenes in this where there are, girls that are flirting with him or somebody trying to get his attention that he just doesn't even clock that that's what's happening. And I feel like that is a subtly different thing, but that spoke to my experience.
One of the other things that I kind of liked, so recently I saw something about how cliques are changing, cliques in like high schools and middle schools, and in some ways for the better, where a lot of groups are intermingling in a way that in this movie you don't see. Yeah. In my high school you saw a little bit of, and it, there's a moment in here where you remember one of the kids is shooting his car because it's dead again and he's mad, right? And
I love that scene.
Yeah, it's a great scene. And they're talking about getting out of the town, and one of them says, we're never going to get out of this town. We're all hillbillies. Well, except for Quentin.
Yeah.
And then what you see is that of all of them, Quentin is the most hillbilly in terms of where he comes from.
His external variables.
Yeah. And I loved getting that glimpse into his life, and the fact that Homer didn't make a meal out of it. The movie didn't make a meal out of it. Nope. I was wondering why Homer was talking to a prostitute, and then suddenly we're going down an alley to the woods, to the shack. Yeah. And Homer doesn't care. He's like, this guy has become my friend. He sat down at this table and everyone was like in shock, which they did make a meal of that.
Yes.
Totally. Yeah. But that was less important than not making a meal of where Quentin came from. And I loved that they did that. I thought it was a nice touch on the director's part that they did that, and the writer's part for putting it in there. Because Quentin was obviously determined to at least try to not stay in town. Not that he was probably going to get out of town, but
right.
Yeah,
there were a lot of things in this movie that were delightfully understated. They never made a meal about the fact that Odella has a bad leg.
Yeah.
That's a thing that character has, and for all I know, it was just a decision that the actor made because it was nowhere in the script. So, yeah.
And maybe it's something that the actor has, and because there were times where it was worse than others.
Yeah.
And it was just a part of it.
I feel like I don't think it's something the actor has because I've seen him in other stuff. So if it
I don't
is,
know.
then it's something that he knows how to hide when he wants to.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there are a lot of things like that were just very nice.
Do you remember the scene in the lab where they are mixing up something and then they pour it down?
Yeah.
And do you know exactly what happened?
Yeah, so
Okay, because I need a little bit more play by play.
yeah, so they're sitting there. It's sort of a classic scene in high school movies about smart people. You get these scenes in Spider-Man movies and stuff. Is the kids are in the back of the room and they're doing their own science experiment that's so much more advanced than what they're being taught. In particular, it's Quentin showing off a formula for essentially rocket fuel. It's his version of what they're going to put in the rocket to make it blast off, and they're working on it and examining it, and then the teacher starts coming their way. So they very quickly they pour it into the sink, and then they run the water and wash it down the drain. Now you have to imagine all those desks have sinks, and they're all going to feed into one pipe. So somewhere down under the floor, all of those sinks are connected. And so they wash this rocket fuel down the drain, and then they go back to their experiment, and a couple of minutes later, one of the girls in the class strikes a match to start her Bunsen burner, tosses the match into the sink, and the fumes from the rocket fuel that they've made just explode up out of every sink. Yeah.
And I guess really what I'm asking, because that all made sense and I caught all of that, is do you remember what the chemical composition was of it?
I don't remember the specific composition.
That's fine. I didn't ask you before the show, but I was sitting there going, wait, what's there that water wouldn't affect, that it would still light up like that?
Yeah.
But it's fine. It's fine.
I did appreciate, in the world of rocket fuel, I did appreciate that they made the shift from solid fuel to liquid fuel. That is a thing that they really use liquid fuel in rockets, and so it was cool. That was one of the few moments where we get told a specific scientific principle that is executed on screen sort of in the style of The Martian. And I really appreciated that, especially because it had to do with Roy Lee saving the day with moonshine, which was one of the most charming shots of the entire movie. Another example of using science, and this is just probably my favorite scene in the entire movie, and the most synthesis moment in this movie, is finding 𝕊𝕐13.
Yes, I loved that moment.
That whole sequence of doing the math, learning the trigonometry, doing the math, figuring out how far it could have gone, and then measuring it out with the rope and the music. I listened to that. I have the October Sky soundtrack, and I've listened to that song probably 400 times.
Listen, I think my favorite part about it is they do the math, and then they have to do the boring human part.
Yeah.
Which is, all right, we're gonna take the rope from here to here.
Pace
That's
it out.
one. All right, all right, now you move. Oh, that's two. This is three. Like, oh my God, that is, it's just, it felt so human. It felt so, I feel like probably what a lot of scientists feel like. We often see the cool stuff that the scientists do in movies and TV and stuff like that. And kids are going to often be inspired by how awesome it is. But then there's the mundane that you have to do. And it's honestly a good portion of what you do. And that's what we see here. And then I love seeing the moment of like, well, how did we go wrong?
Yeah.
The math is right.
What didn't we consider?
Yeah. And then they figure it out. And that just felt so real to actual science as well. I don't know. There was that was one of my favorite parts of the movie.
Well, I feel like, we made an interesting distinction back when we were talking about the film The Martian. And that is that the book of The Martian is the story of someone coming up with solutions. And the movie is the story of someone presenting solutions. That we don't actually see Matt Damon come up with the answer on screen the way that in the book we do see Mark working through the problem. And obviously, it's just a matter of screen time, whatever. But most of October Sky is presenting the science. Hey, look, they figured out how to make a rocket. But I feel like the search for 𝕊𝕐 is the one moment in this movie that really celebrates the process of science. That it's not just about finding the answer, it's about how did you find the answer and what led you to that. And once that is solid, you know the answer is going to be solid. You know, if you did the process right, that is the promise of science. The promise of math is if you did the process right, your conclusion will be solid. And it was.
Yeah. So I have to talk a little bit about the educators.
Okay, go for it. Yeah.
Movie. The principal is a villain.
Okay.
And he made me exceptionally angry.
Yeah.
So my grandfather was a principal for many, many years. And, you know, I lived with him for a good while. And I know what it's like to be around someone who is, you know, can be harsh and who's an educator and
rigid.
And can be rigid, right? But my grandfather would never, ever keep anybody from trying to learn something.
Yeah.
And the fact that this principal is so entitled because he's allowed to go off to college and he's allowed to get out of whatever city he grew up in and be a principal here, but everybody else, unless you're a jock, everybody else, you're poor and you're going to the mines, and that's just the way it is. And you should, like, it's fine if you drop out of school. I was horrified by all of this, and I really, really struggled watching him and Miss Riley not be on the same page. And like, thank God for the Rileys of the world.
Yes.
I hope everybody has everybody had a teacher like that? I hope that you have. Please tell me that you have. I was lucky enough to have a couple. I had a wonderful English teacher. I had two incredible debate coaches who also, for the most part, were in the English department that were phenomenal. And they never let you slip, but they always had, it always felt supportive, right?
Yeah.
And this principal is like, oh no, these kids are bad kids because they're making rockets and learning math and science. Shame on you. Also, I'm going to let the cops arrest you at school. Anytime anything else happens, he's like, what's happening here? Well, you can't make a scene. And he lets this scene happen. He lets these boys be completely humiliated. And so anyway, I wanted to drop kick him to the moon.
To me, so I am frustrated by him. I don't think I hated him as much as you did. But the biggest, most damning thing that the principal does that it makes me bare my teeth every time I watch this movie is when they have found 𝕊𝕐 and Homer is showing off the trigonometry that proves that they couldn't do it. It very quickly becomes obvious that Homer is right. There is not a long time in that scene where the principal is like holding his ground and insisting that Homer did it. No, it's like, oh, okay, well, you found the rocket. I guess you didn't do it. But as soon as Homer starts presenting the math, the principal makes a crack about how you learned more in the coal mine than you did in high school. And that to me is just the most petty. Like, that is the thing that makes me decide this is not somebody that I care to sympathize with, because he knows he's wrong and he's still lashing out at the kid for being smart, for having knowledge. That's the crime that he's ridiculing right now, is that this kid learned something. And that is just inexcusable for an educator. Like, that would be bad from somebody who worked at the mine, but at least with that, I could write it off as like, oh, well, he's like sort of, he doesn't have an education, and so he's threatened by people that he thinks feel superior or whatever. But like, this guy's clearly educated. He's clearly pretty well off. he should be celebrating kids who go out and learn trigonometry on their own.
Yeah. You know, this scene also reminds me of, I don't remember what the statistic is, and I don't remember where it's from, but I'm going to tell you about it anyway. So join me for the ride, which is how we talk about how the cops close a lot more cases than they used to. And we should be proud of them for that and all of this stuff. And I'm sitting here going, well, that's because of science. And also because the work didn't have to be done. If anybody had showed those kids the rocket that the cops had found when they found where the fire had started, the kids would have been like, man, we don't know how to make that. That has spring-loaded fins. Like, this is so cool. We should have thought of that.
And by the way, the principal was the one who took one look at it and was like, that's not their rocket. I know exactly what that is. That guy probably served in World War II, and yeah,
like the lack of work that went into things and the assumptions made and the stereotypes that were used to convict. I don't.
If it makes you feel better, one of the things that they changed in the movie that is not how it went down in real life is exactly that. Apparently, in the real story that actually happened in the 1950s with the Rocket Boys, the cops showed up and they were like, "Hey, somebody started a forest fire, and we heard about your rocket, and we think it was you." And it was like a couple of minutes before everybody was like, "Wait a minute, you couldn't have made this rocket." And they never like got expelled or anything like that.
That does make me actually feel a little bit better. But sort of.
I'm
glad it's
within
not
the
real.
context of the film, it's still frustrating.
I was there was a moment in the movie where I was we learned that Miss Riley has Hodgkin's lymphoma, and I was sitting here going, oh man, was this just for the movie? Was this true to life? Because we know that this is based on a true story, but true stories always have something that's embellished, as seen by your example. And it broke my heart when we saw at the end that
she died at 31.
And I was just like, oh fuck no! Like the amount of kids that are losing out on a light in this school. But
by the way, I'm older than 31, and that's weird. Somewhere along, I didn't notice, but somewhere along the way, I passed the age at which people can die young and still have like done things with their lives. I'm still in the mindset of like a teenager, where if somebody died younger than me, then they like sort of didn't get to live at all. It's very strange that somebody can be several years younger than me and
the Billy Joel
deserve to be in a movie.
song, "Only the Good Die Young," no longer applies to us.
I know, right?
What have we done?
Yeah, seriously.
We are shit people.
Demonstrably so.
Obviously. I don't have a lot more to say.
Yeah, I think we're bringing it home.
I will say I would like to talk about a couple of the shots that we see that, again, they don't make a meal out of. I've got 3 of them.
Go for it.
The first one is when Homer is going down into the mine shaft for the first time, and he's on night shift, you can tell. He looks up through the grate in the elevator, and we see Sputnik go over.
Yes.
And somehow it did not feel on the nose to me, and I was like, how did they do that? And I think it's maybe the setup or the fact that it's not commented on. The setup is they're going to see it every night after sundown, and you're going to be able to see it like the hour before dawn. Yeah, something like that, right? And we've already established that. And I don't know,
I think part of it is that they don't do it a lot. There's the scene at the very beginning where they look up and they see Sputnik, and then the next time they do it is that scene 2/3 of the way through the movie. If it had been like this recurring theme that like every night he's looking up at the sky and watching Sputnik or something, then it would have felt more heavy-handed when he's going down into the mine and he's still looking up at the sky. But the fact that it's played more casually than that. Like, there was the day that everybody was looking at it, and then it was just part of the sky.
Yeah.
But it's still up there.
Yeah. It was a beautiful moment, like this sinking into his own personal hell and watching what has inspired him get further away and get further out of reach. It was beautifully done.
And a very literal hell. The whole mine sequence was just that is a terrifying environment.
Not into that at all.
Yeah.
The number 723, that's Ike's number when he gets sent to the mine. And we see that. They show us an insert of that. And then when he pulls it out later, I had completely forgotten about that medallion. And he pulls it out, what? At
the science fair, I think. Yeah.
And, you know, he has a moment with it. And I was just like, oh, damn. Oh, damn. Like, we haven't seen him playing with it. I, as an audience member, forgot it. And then you're going to do this. And it just like, oh, I loved it. It was so lovely.
Yeah.
And then my last one is they're doing that final launch, right? And it's cool that his parents show up. They set off the rocket, and it's neat. But then when they pull out and they do all of these super wides, and you see it from all of these other people's points of view, and 𝕋𝕙𝕖 getting to see it through her hospital window and knowing what it was, that was a, oh shit, okay, I'm gonna cry. I'm absolutely gonna cry. I teared up, but
I did. That last scene, every time that I see that, like, I can watch that clip on YouTube and I tear up. That whole last launch with the dad and, you know, counting down. It is, by the way, I lost track at a certain point, but I'm pretty sure that is the only launch in the film that actually happens after one. The entire film, they're like, 5, 4, 3.
There were a couple, but I noticed that too, that there were not very many.
It's actually, it's relevant to another thing that I really liked, which, again, in the Understated, they never really make a meal of it thing, is their increasing infrastructure. Over the course of the film, they're, you know, at the very beginning, they're like lighting a match and then running away. And then a little bit later, they have like an erector set with a match and a string. And then a little bit later, they have like a electrical sort of switch that they throw. And then at the very end, it's this very nice like wooden box with a light. And I really appreciated that their infrastructure improved over time. You got the sense that they aren't just making rockets, they're refining their whole process. Another thing that broke my heart, but I liked how they played it off, was him meeting von Braun and shaking his hand and not even realizing that was von Braun until he was gone. Apparently, even that is wish fulfillment on the part of 𝕋𝕙𝕖, who wrote the book Rocket Boys, by the way. He never met him. Apparently, in the real story, he went out to find Wernher von Braun at this conference because somebody told him that at this science fair, Wernher von Braun was attending. And that moment that he went out to go find Wernher von Braun and try to shake his hand was the moment that Wernher von Braun decided to visit his exhibit.
Oh no.
And
I hate that story. Yeah. I could have done without that.
Sorry.
No.
Yeah. Very heartbreaking.
You are leaving us with that?
Well, no. Well, so the last scene with the rocket launch, that is something that just gets me every time. The music, I could do a whole nother episode of The Synthesis just talking about the soundtrack to October Sky. But there's something. This is one of those things where I feel like I'm putting something on the film. I don't know that this is necessarily what they were going for with the shot, but it's what I took from the shot. The scene that you were talking about with the rocket being viewed from far away and watching it go up, there's something incredible, I guess. It's just, there's something about that that's so beautiful in this sort of here we are kind of sense, you know, that in the middle of this enormous environment that has been here for billions of years, it's like a fist in the air. It's like, yes, we can do this. We can shoot something up into heaven based on nothing but our determination and our knowledge. And that shot gets me for a very specific reason.
That is a much better way to end
you.
This episode.
All right. So that is it for us on The Synthesis tonight. Tune in next week. We have a very special episode. We've got one more episode this season on The Synthesis, and we have a special surprise. We are going to be interviewing...
Wait. Are we actually telling people? Is this how we're telling people?
I think we should. Yeah, we gotta build hype, right?
I mean, yeah,
we can't
I
just,
suppose
show
so,
up and
but
surprise. Yeah.
I don't know. You guys, this is a big deal.
Yeah, we worked hard to get this.
And I don't know. It's like a surprise party. I feel like we're supposed to be really quiet about it until it's. But you're right.
All right.
We should tell everybody so that they can get excited. But
all right. So after reading The Martian for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, we reached out to Andy Weir to have him on our show, and we got him. Mm-hmm. But we're not talking about The Martian.
Oh no.
Andy Weir's next book, his third novel, is coming out next week. It's called Project Hail Mary, and they sent us a copy. We read it. I read it in like 18 hours, and it's an awesome book, and we have Andy Weir next week for an interview discussing his new book, Project Hail Mary.
So here's the deal. There are spoilers in it.
Yep.
So if you don't...
Light spoilers. We don't go through every single twist and turn, but there are things that you don't get from the back of the box.
Yes.
Back of the book.
And so I just want to put it out there that I would say that there are some light and some mid-sized spoilers.
Yeah.
So be careful if you are a big reader of Andy Weir. Go out and buy it. It's a great book. It
will be on shelves, I think, the day that our interview airs next week.
So get excited to meet Andy Weir and his adorable dog.
Yes. By the way, for those, just to underline, this is a pre-recorded interview.
Yes.
So we're not going to be taking questions from the audience or anything like that. We needed to work around Andy Weir's schedule. But we're going to be releasing it at the usual time, 5:30 Pacific time on Thursday next week. I believe that's May 6th. So tune in and check out The Synthesis interviewing Andy Weir. We talk about Project Hail Mary, we talk about his second book, Artemis, and we talk about The Martian quite a bit.
We do. We managed to sneak it in.
One more episode of The Synthesis for this season.